The North Hollywood Shootout. The story of the North Hollywood Shootout begins not with a single dramatic morning, but with the methodical transformation of two ordinary men into what would become known as the high-incident bandits. Larry Eugene Phillips Jr. and disabled Stefan Emil Mătăsăreanu were unlikely partners whose paths converged at a local gym where their shared grievances against society and fascination with weaponry would forge a deadly alliance that would terrorize Los Angeles and forever change American policing. Phillips, born in Los Angeles under the assumed name Larry Warfel, had endured a troubled childhood that left him bitter and resentful toward authority. His early experiences with the justice system and economic struggles had cultivated a deep-seated anger that would eventually manifest in violent criminality. Mătăsăreanu, a Romanian immigrant seeking the American dream, found instead disappointment and disillusionment as his legitimate business ventures failed to provide the wealth and status he craved. The birth of a criminal partnership. The fateful meeting between Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Mătăsăreanu occurred in 1989 at Gold's Gym in Los Angeles, where they became fast friends due to their mutual interests in improving their physicality. What began as a shared passion for weightlifting devolved into something far more sinister as these two damaged. Men discovered they had much more in common than just fitness goals. Phillips was described as a specialist in attracting people who were missing a certain something in their lives. People who allowed Larry to mentally break them down and rebuild them into someone that was of use to him. In Mătăsăreanu, he found the perfect subject for his psychological manipulation. The Romanian immigrant struggling with failed business ventures and financial disappointments was vulnerable to Phillips' dominant personality and grand schemes. Phillips, the younger of the two at 26, possessed a calculating and ruthless personality that dominated their lopsided partnership, ultimately luring the 30-year-old Romanian-born Mătăsăreanu into what would become their fatal enterprise. Their bond deepened when Mătăsăreanu took in Phillips after he fled the law following an attempted scam scheme in Denver, Colorado, and a resultant arrest. This act of shelter and loyalty would cement their criminal partnership. By 1989, their relationship had extended beyond the gym. Sharon Santos, Phillips' girlfriend for 3 years, would meet Emil when all parties gathered at an address that appears to have been rented by Phillips' half-brother Dennis Franks. This network of relationships provided the foundation for what would become an increasingly sophisticated criminal enterprise. They grew close over their common passion for heist movies and weightlifting, and eventually decided to pull off their own heists. Their fascination with films like Michael Mann's Heat was merely entertainment. It became a blueprint for their criminal methodology. They studied these films obsessively, analyzing tactics, timing, and the portrayal of professional criminals who operated with military precision. The psychological dynamic between the two men was crucial to understanding how they evolved from gym partners to bank robbers. Phillips provided the vision and leadership, while Mătăsăreanu brought resources and unwavering loyalty. Together, they created a feedback loop of criminal ambition that would escalate far beyond what either might have attempted alone. Before their infamous final act, Phillips and Mătăsăreanu established themselves as the most dangerous bank robbers in Los Angeles history through a series of meticulously planned heists that earned them their FBI designation as the high-incident bandits. Their criminal career began in earnest in May 1996, when they executed their first major score by robbing 2 Bank of America branches in the San Fernando Valley. These initial robberies netted them approximately $1.5 million and established their modus operandi: overwhelming firepower, military-grade body armor, and precise timing coordinated with cash delivery schedules. The pair's approach was methodical and professional. They would spend weeks, sometimes months, conducting surveillance on their targets. They studied employee schedules, delivery times, security procedures, and escape routes with the dedication of military strategists. Their reconnaissance was so thorough that they knew exactly when banks received their largest cash shipments. Now, typically in the early morning hours, when branches were preparing for the day's business, preparing for war. What set Phillips and Mătăsăreanu apart from ordinary bank robbers was their commitment to overwhelming firepower and protection. Over the months leading up to their final robbery, they accumulated an arsenal that would have been impressive for a small military unit. Their weapons cache included multiple AK-47 assault rifles, which they illegally modified to fire fully automatic. They also possessed AR-15 rifles, a Beretta 9.2 FS pistol, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. But perhaps most significantly, they invested heavily in body armor that would prove nearly impenetrable to standard police weapons. Their body armor was not off-the-shelf equipment, but custom-modified gear that covered their entire torsos and arms. The armor was designed to stop rifle rounds, not just handgun bullets, giving them an almost supernatural resistance to police gunfire.
Ow.
This armor would become their trademark and the source of their apparent invincibility during their final confrontation. The preparation extended beyond weapons and armor. They studied police response times and tactics, understanding that their window of opportunity would be limited once law enforcement arrived. They took phenobarbital before their robberies to steady their nerves and maintain focus under extreme stress, a detail that speaks to their systematic approach to crime. The target: Bank of America, North Hollywood. The Bank of America branch at 6600 Laurel Canyon Boulevard in North Hollywood was not chosen at random. Phillips and Mătăsăreanu had spent months studying this particular location, mapping its layout, observing its routines, and timing their planned robbery to coincide with what they believed would be a major cash delivery. Their intelligence gathering was exhaustive. They knew the bank's opening procedures, the number of employees typically present in the early morning hours, the location of security cameras, and most importantly, the schedule for armored car deliveries. They had calculated that on the morning of February 28, 1997, the bank would contain approximately $750,000 in cash from a recent delivery. The branch was located in a busy commercial area with multiple escape routes, which factored into their planning. They had mapped several potential exit strategies and had identified the most likely positions, where police might establish roadblocks or containment perimeters. February 28, 1997, the day that changed everything. The morning of February 28, 1997 dawned clear and cold in Los Angeles. As the city slowly awakened to another routine day, Phillips and Mătăsăreanu were making their final preparations for what they intended to be their most lucrative heist yet. At approximately 9:30 a.m., the two men donned their custom body armor and loaded their weapons. They had taken their usual dose of phenobarbital to calm their nerves and maintain focus during the high-stress operation ahead. Their plan was simple in concept, but devastating in execution. Enter the bank with overwhelming force, secure the cash, and exit before police could mount an effective response. At exactly 9:17 a.m. on February 28, 1997, Phillips and Mătăsăreanu entered the Bank of America branch through the front entrance, forever changing the landscape of American law enforcement. What happened next would be seared into the memory of everyone present and would soon be broadcast live to millions of viewers across the nation. The two men had transformed themselves into walking arsenals. They wore custom-modified body armor that covered their entire torsos, arms and legs, armor specifically designed to defeat rifle rounds, not just handgun bullets. Their faces were partially concealed, but their intent was unmistakable, as they carried fully automatic AK-47 rifles with high-capacity magazines. The moment they crossed the threshold, they began firing their weapons into the air and ceiling, immediately establishing dominance through sheer terror. The sound of automatic gunfire in the confined space was deafening, a thunderous cacophony that sent shockwaves through the building. The staccato rhythm of the AK-47s firing on full automatic created an almost otherworldly atmosphere of violence that no civilian location should ever experience. The effect on the bank's employees and customers was instantaneous and complete. People dove for cover behind desks, counters, and anything that might provide protection from the rain of bullets. Ceiling tiles and debris fell as the robbers' rounds tore through the building's infrastructure above their heads. The psychological impact was profound. This wasn't just a robbery, it was a military-style assault on a civilian target. Their entry was not indiscriminate violence but calculated intimidation. By firing into the air and ceiling rather than directly at people, they demonstrated both their capability for extreme violence and their current restraint. This tactical approach created a climate of absolute terror while avoiding unnecessary casualties that might have complicated their escape. Everyone in the bank understood immediately that these men possessed the firepower to kill everyone present, if they chose to do so. Bank employees, trained in robbery procedures through countless drills, immediately followed their protocols by activating silent alarms and complying with the robbers' demands. However, nothing in their training had prepared them for the military-style assault that was unfolding. The standard cooperate and survive approach took on new meaning when faced with adversaries who possessed the firepower of a small army. The robbers moved with practiced efficiency, their heavy armor making them appear almost mechanical as they swept through the bank. Their weapons were held in a professional manner, suggesting familiarity with military or law enforcement tactics. They communicated with each other in short, clipped phrases, maintaining the disciplined approach that had served them in their previous robberies. Customers who had come to the bank for routine transactions found themselves in the middle of what felt like a war zone. The elderly, parents with children, business people conducting their morning banking all were suddenly face to face with a level of violence that belonged in a combat zone, not a neighborhood bank. The psychological trauma of those 8 minutes would affect survivors for years to come. Once inside, Phillips and Mătăsăreanu quickly moved to secure the bank's cash reserves, but their meticulous planning encountered its first major setback almost immediately. Their plan was simple in concept: enter the bank, scare bank employees and customers, neutralize as needed the security guards, break the vault, steal the money, and exit 8 minutes later. However, the cash delivery they had timed their robbery around had been rescheduled, leaving far less money in the bank than they had anticipated. The robbers had expected to find approximately $750,000 in cash from a recent armored car delivery, but instead discovered that the bank contained only routine daily cash reserves, a fraction of what they had planned to steal. This discovery sent Mătăsăreanu into a violent rage that would prove to be one of the critical factors in their eventual downfall. Frustrated by the smaller-than-expected haul, Mătăsăreanu began firing indiscriminately into the bank's safe, cash handling equipment, and money storage areas. His automatic weapons fire destroyed much of the money they were attempting to steal, with bills shredded by gunfire and scattered throughout the bank. The sound of sustained automatic gunfire inside the building was overwhelming, with brass shell casings accumulating on the floor as Mătăsăreanu vented his frustration through violence. Phillips, maintaining more composure than his partner, attempted to gather what undamaged cash remained while Mătăsăreanu's destructive rage continued. The methodical approach that had served them in previous robberies began to break down as the reality of their situation became apparent. Instead of the quick, professional heist they had planned, they found themselves in an increasingly chaotic situation with diminishing returns. The bank's employees, forced to witness this display of violence, were traumatized not just by the threat to their lives, but by the senseless destruction of the workplace they knew intimately. Every bullet fired into the bank's equipment and furnishings represented a violation of their normal, peaceful environment. The psychological impact was profound. These were unjust robbers, but agents of chaos, who seemed willing to destroy everything around them. During these crucial 8 minutes inside the bank, the robbers' body language and behavior revealed the stress they were experiencing. Despite their overwhelming firepower and armor, they knew their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The silent alarms had been triggered, and it was only a matter of time before law enforcement arrived in force. The robbery itself became a study in criminal psychology under pressure. Phillips, the dominant personality, tried to maintain control and salvage what he could from the deteriorating situation. Mătăsăreanu, less psychologically stable, allowed his emotions to override tactical thinking, potentially costing them both their lives and freedom. As the minutes ticked by, both men must have realized that their carefully planned heist was becoming a nightmare. The money they had risked everything to steal was being destroyed before their eyes, and the sounds of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance. What should have been their most profitable robbery was turning into a catastrophic failure that would require them to fight their way out of an increasingly impossible situation. The escape attempt. 9:25 a.m., exactly 8 minutes after their dramatic entrance. Phillips and Mătăsăreanu prepared to exit the bank, expecting to execute their usual clean getaway. They had successfully completed the robbery phase of their operation. Despite the disappointing cash haul, now needed to reach their getaway vehicle and disappear into the Los Angeles traffic before law enforcement could mount an effective response. However, as they prepared to leave, the faint sound of sirens could be heard approaching from multiple directions. The Los Angeles Police Department had already responded to the silent alarm with impressive speed, and patrol units were converging on the bank from several different routes. The robbers' 8-minute window was closing rapidly, but they still believed they could reach their vehicle and escape before being effectively surrounded. As they emerged from the bank's front entrance carrying duffel bags containing what cash they had managed to collect, they were greeted by a sight that must have sent chills through even their hardened criminals. LAPD patrol cars were already positioning themselves in the parking lot and surrounding streets. The clean getaway they had executed successfully in previous robberies was no longer an option. What should have been a routine arrest situation immediately escalated into something unprecedented in American law enforcement history. The responding officers, armed with standard-issue .38 caliber revolvers, 9mm handguns, and 12-gauge shotguns, found themselves facing two heavily armored adversaries carrying military-grade automatic weapons. The tactical situation that confronted these patrol officers was beyond anything in their training or experience. The first exchange of gunfire began in the bank's parking lot at approximately 9:25 a.m. And it quickly became apparent that the police were not just outgunned, they were facing an almost impossible tactical situation. Their handgun rounds, fired from cover positions behind their patrol cars, bounced harmlessly off the robbers' custom body armor. The distinctive metallic pinging sound of bullets striking armor and ricocheting away created a surreal auditory backdrop to the unfolding gun battle. Meanwhile, the criminals' high-powered rifles easily penetrated police vehicles, equipment, and anything else the officers might use for cover. The .30 caliber rounds from their AK-47s went through car doors, engine blocks, and building materials as if they were paper. The technological advantage was so overwhelming that police officers found themselves in the unprecedented position of being completely ineffective against their adversaries. The robbers, perhaps surprised by the rapid police response, but not panicked, began moving methodically through the area, engaging officers, while attempting to commandeer vehicles for their escape. Their body armor made them virtually impervious to police gunfire, creating an almost surreal scene where they walked calmly through what should have been lethal exchanges of gunfire. The sight of two men in military-style armor walking through sustained gunfire, while calmly returning fire with automatic weapons, was unlike anything the responding officers had ever encountered. It was as if they were facing opponents from a different era of warfare, armed and protected far beyond anything civilian law enforcement was prepared to handle. As word of the situation spread over police radio frequencies, the initial reports must have seemed unbelievable to dispatchers and supervisors. Officers were describing a scenario that belonged in a war zone, not a bank robbery in suburban Los Angeles. The phrase, "they've got automatic weapons. There is nothing we have that can stop them," would be heard repeatedly over police radio as the situation continued to deteriorate. What followed was 44 minutes of sustained gunfire that would be broadcast live on television and witnessed by millions of viewers in real time. The intensity and duration of the gunfight was unlike anything in modern American law enforcement history. Phillips and Mătăsăreanu moved methodically through the neighborhood, engaging police officers while attempting to commandeer vehicles for their escape. Their body armor made them virtually impervious to police gunfire, creating an almost surreal scene where they walked calmly through what should have been lethal exchanges of gunfire. The robbers fired more than 1,100 rounds during the confrontation, while police officers discharged over 650 rounds in return. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the residential neighborhood, sending civilians fleeing for cover and creating scenes of chaos that were broadcast into homes across America. Television news helicopters arrived on scene and began broadcasting the events live, creating an unprecedented real-time documentation of an active gun battle between criminals and police. The images of heavily armored men casually walking through gunfire, while police officers took cover behind their vehicles, created a profound impact on public consciousness and law enforcement thinking. As the shootout continued, both robbers began to show signs of fatigue and injury. Despite their armor's effectiveness against handgun rounds, rifle fire from police had begun to find gaps in their protection. Phillips sustained multiple wounds but continued fighting with determined ferocity. The end came in two separate but equally dramatic ways. Phillips, wounded and running low on ammunition, attempted to flee on foot but was cornered by police officers who had finally obtained more powerful weapons from a nearby gun store. In the final exchange, Phillips was mortally wounded and died at the scene, possibly from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Mătăsăreanu's end was equally dramatic, but more prolonged. After his getaway vehicle was disabled by police gunfire, he engaged in a final desperate gun battle near a truck stop. Despite being hit 29 times, his body armor kept him alive and fighting for an extended period. He finally succumbed to his wounds after the prolonged gun battle, bleeding to death despite paramedics' efforts to save his life. The investigation. The investigation that followed the North Hollywood shootout was one of the most comprehensive and intensive criminal investigations in LAPD history. Detectives and federal agents worked around the clock to piece together not only the events of February 28, 1997, but the entire criminal history of the two men who had brought unprecedented violence to the streets of Los Angeles. The initial challenge facing investigators was simply identifying the perpetrators. Both men had used aliases and false identities throughout their criminal careers, making it difficult to immediately determine their true names and backgrounds. Phillips had been using the name Larry Warfel, while Mătăsăreanu had multiple false identities and documents. The process of establishing their real identities required extensive forensic work and coordination with multiple agencies. One of the investigation's primary focuses was determining how Phillips and Mătăsăreanu had acquired their extensive arsenal of weapons and military-grade body armor. The weapons recovered from the scene and their residences were traced through their serial numbers, revealing a complex network of legal and illegal firearms acquisitions that spanned several years. Investigators discovered that some weapons had been purchased legally through licensed dealers, using the robbers' various false identities and clean criminal records in certain jurisdictions. Other weapons were traced to private sales and gun shows, where background check requirements were less stringent. The most concerning discovery was evidence that some weapons had been illegally modified to fire fully automatic, suggesting connections to individuals with technical expertise in weapons modification. The body armor presented an even more complex investigative challenge. A custom-modified equipment had been professionally adapted to provide maximum protection against law enforcement weapons. Investigators traced the armor through its components and modifications, revealing connections to military surplus dealers and individuals with specialized knowledge of ballistic protection. The sophistication of the armor modifications suggested that Phillips and Mătăsăreanu had either possessed technical expertise themselves or had access to individuals who could provide such services. The financial investigation revealed how Phillips and Mătăsăreanu had used their robbery proceeds to fund their increasingly elaborate criminal enterprise. Bank records and financial transactions showed they had lived lavishly between robberies, using their stolen money to purchase weapons, equipment, and maintain expensive lifestyles that included luxury cars, expensive apartments, and high-end consumer goods. The money trail also revealed the true scope of their criminal activities. Investigators definitively linked Phillips and Mătăsăreanu to several previous bank robberies in the Los Angeles area, earning them retroactive designation as the high-incident bandits. Ballistics evidence, witness descriptions, and modus operandi analysis confirmed their responsibility for multiple previous crimes dating back to June 1995. Their first major score had been in May 1996, when they robbed two Bank of America branches in the San Fernando Valley, netting approximately $1.5 million. This success had provided the financial foundation for their increasingly sophisticated operations, and had convinced them that their methods were sustainable for long-term criminal careers. Criminal psychologists and behavioral analysts worked to understand the partnership dynamics that had created such an effective and dangerous criminal team. The investigation revealed that Phillips had been the dominant personality, using his manipulative skills to control and direct Mătăsăreanu's actions. This psychological dynamic explained how individuals with different backgrounds and temperaments had been able to function as such an effective criminal partnership. The analysis of their personal relationships revealed the network of individuals who had unknowingly supported their criminal activities. Sharon Santos, Phillips' girlfriend, had been unaware of the full extent of his criminal activities, though investigators discovered she had provided alibis and assistance that had helped the robbers avoid detection. Other family members and associates were interviewed extensively to determine whether they had knowledge of or participation in the criminal activities. The crime scene processing was extensive and complex, involving multiple locations, including the bank, the surrounding neighborhood where the shootout occurred, and the residences of both perpetrators. Forensic experts collected and analyzed thousands of pieces of evidence, including spent shell casings, bullet fragments, damaged vehicles, and building materials struck by gunfire. The ballistics analysis was particularly comprehensive, as investigators worked to match specific weapons to specific crimes and to understand the full capabilities of the robbers' arsenal. The forensic work confirmed that the weapons used in the North Hollywood shootout were the same ones used in previous robberies, providing definitive links between the crimes. DNA evidence collected from the crime scenes and the robbers' equipment was analyzed and compared to evidence from previous unsolved crimes, potentially linking Phillips and Mătăsăreanu to additional criminal activities that had not been previously attributed to them. One of the most troubling aspects of the investigation was the revelation that law enforcement agencies had possessed information that might have allowed them to identify and apprehend Phillips and Mătăsăreanu before the North Hollywood incident. The robbers had been operating for over a year, conducting surveillance on multiple targets and making preparations that should have been detectable through effective intelligence gathering and analysis. The investigation revealed gaps in information sharing between different law enforcement agencies, an insufficient analysis of patterns that might have identified the high-incident bandits before they could execute their final, most devastating crime. These intelligence failures became part of the broader lessons learned from the incident and contributed to improvements in law enforcement intelligence sharing and analysis. Given the interstate implications of some aspects of the case and the weapons violations involved, federal agencies, including the FBI and ATF, became heavily involved in the investigation. This multi-agency approach provided additional resources and expertise, but also created coordination challenges that had to be managed carefully to ensure the investigation's effectiveness. The federal involvement was particularly important in tracing the weapons and armor across state lines and in analyzing connections to other criminal activities in different jurisdictions. The comprehensive nature of the investigation required coordination between local, state, and federal agencies on a scale that was unusual for bank robbery cases. The aftermath: no arrests, no recovery. Unlike many criminal cases, the North Hollywood shootout investigation concluded without arrests or significant money recovery. Both perpetrators died at the scene, ending their criminal careers definitively. The money they had stolen in previous robberies was largely spent on weapons, equipment, and maintaining their lifestyles between crimes. Some weapons and equipment were recovered from their residences, but much of their arsenal had been expended during the shootout itself. The financial investigation revealed that most of their robbery proceeds had been consumed by their expensive preparations for future crimes and their lavish spending between robberies. The North Hollywood shootout had immediate and lasting impacts on law enforcement across the United States. The sight of police officers armed only with handguns facing criminals with military-grade weapons and armor revealed critical gaps in law enforcement preparedness. In the immediate aftermath, police departments nationwide began upgrading their weapons and tactics. The LAPD and other major departments began equipping patrol officers with rifles and more powerful weapons. Training programs were developed to prepare officers for similar high-intensity confrontations. The incident also led to improvements in police body armor and tactical equipment. The image of officers hiding behind their patrol cars while heavily armored criminals walk through gunfire became a catalyst for comprehensive equipment upgrades across American law enforcement. Beyond its impact on law enforcement, the North Hollywood shootout became a defining moment in American culture. The live television coverage brought unprecedented violence into American homes in real time, creating a shared national experience of witnessing an active gun battle. The incident inspired numerous films, documentaries, and television programs. Most notably the film 44 Minutes, The North Hollywood Shootout, which dramatized the events for a national audience. The shootout became a reference point for discussions about gun violence, police preparedness, and the militarization of civilian law enforcement. The North Hollywood shootout revealed critical vulnerabilities in traditional law enforcement approaches to armed confrontations. The incident demonstrated that the assumptions underlying police tactics and equipment were inadequate for dealing with heavily armed and armored criminals. The comprehensive investigation that followed provided valuable insights into how criminals could systematically prepare for confrontations with law enforcement. The level of planning, resources, and sophistication demonstrated by Phillips and Mătăsăreanu became a case study for law enforcement agencies nationwide. The shootout also highlighted the importance of intelligence gathering and proactive investigation in preventing such incidents. While the specific confrontation could not have been prevented given the available information, investigation revealed opportunities for earlier intervention that might have disrupted their criminal activities before they escalated to such extreme levels. Conclusion: the North Hollywood shootout stands as a watershed moment in American law enforcement history. The 44-minute gun battle between two heavily armed bank robbers and Los Angeles police officers revealed critical gaps in police preparedness and led to fundamental changes in how law enforcement agencies prepare for and respond to armed confrontations. The meticulous planning and overwhelming firepower demonstrated by Phillips and Mătăsăreanu represented a new level of criminal sophistication that required equally sophisticated law enforcement responses. Their transformation from ordinary criminals to the high-incident bandits illustrated how systematic preparation and resources could create unprecedented challenges for traditional policing methods. While both perpetrators died in the confrontation, ending their criminal careers, their impact on American law enforcement and culture continues to resonate. The North Hollywood shootout became a defining moment that changed how police departments across the nation prepare for armed confrontations and highlighted the ongoing arms race between criminals and law enforcement in modern America. The investigation that followed, while unable to result in arrests or significant money recovery due to the deaths of both perpetrators, provided valuable insights into the planning and execution of sophisticated criminal enterprises. The comprehensive analysis of their methods, resources, motivations became a blueprint for understanding and preventing similar incidents in the future. Today, more than 25 years after the North Hollywood shootout, its impact continues to influence law enforcement training, equipment, and tactics across the United States. The lessons learned from that terrible morning in February 1997 have made American police officers better prepared for extreme confrontations. Though the incident remains a sobering reminder of the potential for criminal violence in modern society. Subscribe for this and many more stories.